What if a rich family's dismissive mockery of their butler's accent was about to teach them the most profound lesson of their lives? This is Maxwell Thompson, 35 years old, working for an affluent white family who saw him only as the help, never bothering to learn who he really was. Tonight, he's about to reveal a truth that will leave them speechless and forever changed. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if the story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sunrise painted the sky in hues of orange and pink as Maxwell Thompson prepared for another day as a butler for the Prescott family. His alarm wasn't necessary anymore. Years of discipline had trained his body to rise before dawn. The modest one-bedroom apartment he called home was spotless, small but dignified, much like Maxwell himself. He carefully selected his outfit for the day. A perfectly pressed dark suit, polished shoes that wouldn't make noise on the Prescott's marble floors, and a single silver cufflink, his father's, hidden beneath his sleeve. Appearances mattered in Westlake Hills, the exclusive neighborhood where mansions stood like monuments to wealth and privilege. Maxwell's reflection in the mirror told its own story. Deep brown eyes that held more wisdom than most people recognized. Dark skin that had endured both harsh African suns and the colder, subtler climate of American prejudice. Hair cut short and neat, professional and unassuming, exactly how the Prescotts preferred their staff to look. Before leaving, he picked up 3 worn books from his nightstand. Today was Tuesday, which meant he had a 2-hour break while young William Prescott attended fencing lessons, time Maxwell would spend continuing his research on comparative linguistics at the university library downtown. The bus ride from Maxwell's neighborhood to Westlake Hills was a journey between worlds, from modest apartment buildings and family-owned businesses to sprawling estates with manicured lawns. 45 minutes that crossed invisible boundaries of class, opportunity, and assumption. As the bus approached its stop, Maxwell rehearsed the accent he would use today, the one the Prescotts expected, the one that made them comfortable, the one that confirmed what they thought they knew about him. It wasn't his natural voice, but it was the one that kept him employed. The Prescott estate stood at the end of a private drive, a modern architectural showcase of glass, steel, and privilege. 6 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, an indoor pool, home theater, and wine cellar. All of it requiring maintenance from people the Prescotts barely acknowledged as human. "You're 2 minutes late, Maxwell," Alexander Prescott said without looking up from his newspaper as Maxwell entered through the service entrance. At 45, Alexander was the epitome of old money confidence. Designer suits, exclusive club memberships, and a smile reserved exclusively for those who could advance his business interests. "Sorry, Mr. Prescott, bus was running behind schedule today," Maxwell replied, adopting the slightly lilting accent he knew the Prescotts associated with his West African heritage. "Whatever. William needs breakfast before school. Victoria has an important charity gala tonight, so we'll need you to stay until at least 11. That won't be a problem, will it?" Alexander's tone made clear it wasn't really a question. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. "No problem, Mr. Prescott," Maxwell replied, heading toward the kitchen, where 10-year-old William sat at the marble island, absorbed in his tablet. The boy barely looked up as Maxwell entered. Victoria Prescott appeared next, every inch of a socialite in her designer outfit and perfect makeup. At 42, she carried herself with the confidence of a woman who believed her social standing was entirely self-made, conveniently forgetting the family connections that had secured her position in Westlake society. "Morning," she muttered, grabbing the coffee Maxwell had already prepared. "William, your history presentation is today, right? Remember what we discussed. Prescotts don't bring home bees." William nodded without enthusiasm, his eyes never leaving the screen. "Maxwell, we're having the Harrisons for dinner tonight, after the gala. William needs to be presentable."
Victoria glanced at Maxwell briefly. "And try to keep your sentences simple when they're here. Last time they could barely understand your colorful way of speaking." Alexander laughed. "Oh, Victoria, be nice. Not everyone had our educational opportunities." He turned to Maxwell with a condescending smile. "Just stick to yes, sir, and no, ma'am tonight, okay? Less confusion that way." Maxwell nodded, the practiced smile never reaching his eyes. "Yes, Mr. Prescott." After the Prescotts left for their respective day plans, Maxwell sat with William over breakfast. "How are you feeling about your history presentation today?" he asked gently. William shrugged. "Dad will be mad if I don't get an A. I hate public speaking." "Would you like me to help you practice before school? I have a few techniques that might make presenting easier." The boy looked up, surprised by the offer. "You know about public speaking?" Maxwell bit back his initial response. "Yes, William, I know quite a bit about effective communication." What William didn't know, what none of the Prescotts knew, was that Maxwell Thompson held 3 doctoral degrees: linguistics from Oxford, international relations from the Sorbonne, educational psychology from Harvard. He spoke 7 languages fluently: English, French, Arabic, Yoruba, Mandarin, Russian, and Spanish. His research on educational methodologies for multilingual children had been published in prestigious academic journals worldwide. None of this information appeared on the resume he'd submitted to the Prescott family 2 years ago. That document listed only his undergraduate degree in hospitality management and his previous service positions. It mentioned nothing about the visiting professor position he'd held at Princeton, or the research fellowship he was currently completing on the side, a study of how wealthy American families transmitted cultural attitudes about class, race, and service to their children. As he helped William practice his presentation, Maxwell observed how the boy's mind worked. Quick, intuitive, but prone to self-doubt whenever he felt pressured. In another setting, with different parents, William might have developed a genuine love of learning rather than a fear of failure. "See, you present the material perfectly when you're not worried about being judged," Maxwell said, as William flawlessly delivered the last part of his presentation. "You explain it better than my teacher," William admitted. "How come you talk different now than when my parents are around?" The question caught Maxwell off guard. Children noticed more than adults gave them credit for. "Sometimes people hear what they expect to hear, and sometimes it's easier to meet those expectations than to challenge them." William considered this. "You mean you talk like that because my parents think that's how you should talk?" "Something like that. We should get your backpack ready. The driver will be here soon." After William left for school, Maxwell moved efficiently through his morning duties. Laundry, polishing silverware, coordinating with the chef about dinner plans. The work was straightforward but constant, designed to keep household staff too busy for reflection or rebellion. The other household employees barely interacted with Maxwell. Maria, the housekeeper, spoke primarily Spanish and kept to herself. Frank, the gardener, came only on Wednesdays and Fridays. The Prescotts preferred their staff to be invisible to each other as well as to them. It prevented troublesome alliances or comparisons of working conditions. At noon, William's fencing instructor arrived, freeing Maxwell for his scheduled break. He changed from his butler uniform into a professional blazer and slacks, transforming from servant to academic in the small staff bathroom. No one would question his leaving. Tuesday afternoons were his established time off. The university library welcomed him like an old friend. Maxwell nodded to Dr. Kleinman from the linguistics department, who smiled in recognition. Here, he wasn't the Prescott's butler. He was Dr. Thompson, respected scholar. "How's the research coming?" Dr. Kleinman asked as Maxwell set up his laptop at their usual table. "Fascinating and disturbing in equal measure," Maxwell replied in his natural voice. "Crisp, articulate, with the faintest trace of his early years in Nigeria and his education in England. The case study family continues to exceed my expectations in their unconscious transmission of bias." Dr. Kleinman shook his head. "I still can't believe you've maintained this cover for 2 years. Aren't you tempted to just tell them who you really are?" Maxwell smiled. "The methodology requires authentic observation. If they knew I was studying them, they'd modify their behavior." He paused. "Though I admit, it gets more difficult each day." "Your commitment to this research is extraordinary," Dr. Kleinman said. "When's the fellowship conclude again?" 3 more months, Maxwell replied. Then the full analysis and publication. For the next 2 hours, Maxwell worked on his manuscript, Invisible Labor, Visible Prejudice, Language, Power, and Perception in Elite American Households. The Prescotts featured prominently, though under pseudonyms, their casual dismissal of his intelligence, their assumptions about his background, their unconscious conditioning of William to see service workers as inherently inferior, all documented with academic precision. At 2:30, Maxwell transformed back into the Prescott's butler, returning to the mansion to prepare for William's arrival from school. The transition felt increasingly jarring each time, like stepping between realities that shouldn't coexist. William arrived home sullen and quiet. "How was the presentation?" Maxwell asked, setting out a healthy snack of apple slices and cheese. "I got a B+, William whispered, his eyes filling with tears. "Dad's gonna be so angry." Maxwell sat beside him. "A B+ is still very good, William. It shows you understand the material and can communicate it effectively." "Not good enough," William said, his voice small. "Dad says Prescotts have to be the best at everything." The boy's distress over a perfectly respectable grade revealed volumes about the pressure Alexander and Victoria placed on their son. Pressure that had nothing to do with learning and everything to do with status and superiority. "You know," Maxwell said carefully, "some of the most brilliant orators in history struggled with public speaking initially. Winston Churchill had a speech impediment. Many great leaders have overcome similar challenges." William looked up, clearly never having heard such perspective before. "Really? Who else?" Maxwell smiled. James Earl Jones, the voice of Darth Vader, was completely mute as a child due to severe stuttering. Now he's known for having one of the most commanding voices in film history. "But my dad says," "Your father wants what he thinks is best for you, but there are many different ways to measure success in life." As William worked on his homework, Maxwell prepared for the evening's charity gala and dinner party. Victoria had left detailed instructions about everything, from the place settings to which outfit William should wear. Nothing was left to Maxwell's judgment, despite his having handled dozens of similar events flawlessly. At 5:30, Victoria returned home in a flurry of activity and anxiety. "Is everything ready? The Harrisons will be here after the gala, and Alexander's business merger could depend on tonight." She surveyed the dining room critically. "The napkins should be folded differently, more elegant. Don't you know the proper way to set a formal table?" Maxwell bit his tongue. He had studied cultural anthropology and knew more about Western dining etiquette than Victoria would learn in a lifetime of social climbing. "I'll refold them, Mrs. Prescott," he said instead, adopting his work accent once more. Victoria barely noticed, already moving on to inspect the kitchen. "And make sure William wears the navy blazer, not that awful casual thing he likes. The Harrison's son will be here and he attends Westlake Academy. We need William to make a good impression if we want him to get in next year." By 6:45, everything was perfect. The house gleamed. Dinner was ready to be served at their return. William sat uncomfortably in his navy blazer, looking like a miniature version of his father. "Now remember," Victoria instructed Maxwell, "just serve and clear. No chatting with the guests. And if they ask you anything directly, keep it simple. Your accent confuses people who aren't used to it." Alexander arrived at 6:50, immediately adjusting his bow tie. "Everything ready? Harrison could sign the merger agreement tonight if things go well."
"Everything's perfect," Victoria assured him. "I had to correct a few of Maxwell's mistakes with the table setting, but it's fine now." Alexander glanced at Maxwell dismissively. "Just try not to break anything tonight. And remember, simple English." Maxwell nodded, the familiar burn of indignation rising in his throat. 2 years of this treatment, 2 years of documenting every casual insult, every assumption, every moment of being rendered invisible despite standing right in front of them. The charity gala was held at the Westlake Country Club, a sprawling estate of manicured lawns and old money. The Prescott's driver dropped them off at the entrance, where photographers captured the arrivals of Westlake's elite. Maxwell remained at the mansion, preparing for their return with the Harrisons. As he polished the crystal glasses one final time, his phone buzzed with a notification. Dr. Kleinman had sent an email with exciting news. Maxwell's research had been accepted for presentation at the International Symposium on Sociolinguistics in Geneva. The irony wasn't lost on him. While the Prescotts mocked his accent and questioned his intelligence, the academic world recognized him as a leading expert in his field. The sound of cars pulling into the driveway interrupted his thoughts. Maxwell quickly pocketed his phone and resumed his professional demeanor. Back straight, expression neutral, voice ready to adopt the accent expected of him. The front door opened with a flourish as Victoria entered first, her designer gown sparkling under the chandelier light. Alexander followed with James and Eleanor Harrison, he the CEO of a tech company Alexander hoped to merge with, she the chairwoman of Westlake Academy's Board of Trustees. Behind them came William and the Harrisons' son, Patrick, both looking equally uncomfortable in formal attire. "Dinner is ready to be served, Mrs. Prescott," Maxwell announced with his practiced accent. Victoria barely acknowledged him, already guiding the Harrisons toward the dining room. "James was just telling us about their recent trip to Nairobi. You've been to Africa, haven't you, Maxwell?" The question wasn't genuine interest, it was performance, a way to signal to the Harrisons that the Prescotts were worldly enough to have a butler from the exotic continent of Africa. "Yes, ma'am, I was born in Lagos, Nigeria," Maxwell replied, maintaining his accent. "Nigeria, Kenya, same difference," James Harrison said with a dismissive wave. "All those countries blend together anyway, beautiful animals, though." Maxwell felt William's eyes on him, watching for his reaction. The boy had become increasingly aware of the casual condescension directed at the household staff. "Actually, sir," Maxwell began carefully, "Nigeria and Kenya are over 3,000 miles apart, with very different cultures, languages, and—" "Maxwell," Alexander interrupted sharply, "I'm sure the Harrisons aren't interested in a geography lesson. Please serve the appetizers." As Maxwell retreated to the kitchen, he heard Eleanor Harrison's stage whisper, "Where do you find such articulate help these days? Our last butler barely spoke English." The dinner proceeded according to the Prescotts' careful choreography. Maxwell served each course with silent efficiency, refilled wine glasses and cleared plates, all while the adults discussed stock portfolios, real estate values, and the inadequacies of people who weren't present. "Our previous butler was Filipino," James commented as Maxwell served the main course. "Pleasant enough, but his accent was incomprehensible. Yours speaks English rather well for an African." Alexander answered before Maxwell could speak. "From Nigeria, I believe, though we've never really discussed it in detail. He is excellent with household management, which is all that matters." "Africa," Eleanor nodded, as if this confirmed something. "You speak English quite well, then," she said to Maxwell directly, enunciating each word as if speaking to a child. "Thank you, ma'am," Maxwell replied, deepening his accent slightly, noting how they all relaxed when he performed their expectations. "You know," James continued, swirling his wine, "we donated to that well-building project in Tanzania last year. Tax write-off, of course, but apparently they're teaching proper English now. Progress, right?" The casual geography error, assuming Tanzania and Nigeria were somehow interchangeable, was typical. Maxwell had documented dozens of similar instances over 2 years. "Tanzania is a very different country from Nigeria, sir," he said, maintaining his accent, but correcting him nonetheless. "Almost 3,000 miles apart, different languages, cultures, histories." An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. Victoria laughed nervously. "Don't mind Maxwell, he's very proud of his heritage. More wine, James? The conversation quickly shifted, but Patrick, the Harrisons' 16-year-old son, was staring at Maxwell with unexpected intensity. As Maxwell served dessert, Patrick spoke up suddenly. "Wait a minute, aren't you Dr. Maxwell Thompson from the TED Talk about multilingual education? We just watched it in my global studies class." The room fell silent. 6 pairs of eyes turned to Maxwell, who stood perfectly still, dessert tray in hand. The moment he had both anticipated and dreaded for 2 years had arrived unexpectedly. His carefully constructed research methodology was about to collapse around him. But perhaps it was time. Perhaps 2 years of documented observations were enough. "Yes," Maxwell said in his natural voice, crisp, articulate with the subtle cadence of his international education. "I am Dr. Thompson. It's nice to meet a young person who pays attention to educational research." The transformation was immediate and stunning. Alexander's wineglass froze halfway to his lips. Victoria's spoon clattered against her plate. The Harrisons stared in undisguised shock. "What is this?" Alexander demanded, looking between Maxwell and his wife. "Some kind of joke?" "No joke, Mr. Prescott," Maxwell replied, setting down the dessert tray. "I hold doctoral degrees from Oxford, the Sorbonne, and Harvard. I speak 7 languages fluently. And for the past 2 years, I have been conducting research on how wealthy American families unconsciously transmit attitudes about class, race, and service to their children. Your family has been my primary case study." The silence that followed was absolute. William's eyes widened in amazement. Patrick looked triumphant, as if he'd solved a fascinating puzzle. "That's impossible," Victoria finally managed. "We did a background check. You're a butler from—" "I presented the credentials necessary for this position. My research fellowship required authentic immersion. Everything in my application was factually correct, if selectively presented." "You've been studying us? Without our knowledge?" Alexander's face flushed with anger. "That's completely unethical. We'll sue you and whatever institution is funding this invasion of privacy." "All research protocols were approved by the University Ethics Committee. No identifying information will be published without consent. The focus is on patterns of behavior, not specific individuals." "I can't believe this," Victoria whispered. "All this time you were pretending to be, what? Some simple immigrant butler?" "I never pretended anything. You made assumptions based on my appearance and accent. You never asked about my background, my education, my interests, not once in 2 years. You saw exactly what you expected to see." Eleanor Harrison recovered first, social instincts kicking in to salvage the awkward situation. "Well, I think it's fascinating. You must tell us more about your research, Dr. Thompson. I serve on several educational boards, and we're always looking for fresh perspectives." But Alexander wasn't ready to move on. "You deceived us. You entered our home under false pretenses." "Did I?" Maxwell challenged. "My resume stated I had a degree in hospitality management. True. It listed previous service positions. Also true. It mentioned nothing about my other degrees because they weren't relevant to the butler position. You never asked about my academic background. You assumed I had none worth knowing." William, who had remained silent until now, suddenly spoke up. "Is that why you sometimes talk differently when my parents aren't around? And why you know so much about history and science?" "Yes, William. I've been observing how your family interacts with service staff and how those interactions shape your understanding of social hierarchies." "This is outrageous," Victoria declared, though her outrage seemed more performative than genuine, a response she felt was expected. "We've welcomed you into our home, treated you like family." Maxwell couldn't help the short laugh that escaped him. "Mrs. Prescott, in the 2 years I have worked here, you've never once asked about my family, whether I have children, if my parents are still living, what my interests are outside of serving your household. You've never invited me to join a meal, even on holidays when I worked 14-hour shifts.
You've made jokes about my accent and intelligence in front of me, as if I couldn't possibly understand the sophisticated humor of educated Americans." Victoria flushed, glancing uncomfortably at the Harrisons. Patrick, still fascinated by the unfolding drama, interjected. "Your TED Talk has over 2 million views. It's required watching in our global studies curriculum. How did no one recognize you?" "People see what they expect to see," Maxwell explained. "When you're wearing a butler's uniform and speaking with an accent that confirms existing biases, you become invisible as an individual. It's remarkable how powerful those preconceptions can be." James Harrison, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "I remember that TED Talk now, The Language of Invisibility, wasn't it? About how accents and linguistic patterns influence social perceptions and power dynamics." He turned to Alexander with an unexpected smile. "You've had a renowned sociolinguist working in your home for 2 years, and you never knew it. That's actually rather fascinating." Alexander clearly didn't share his fascination. "I don't care if he's the king of linguistics. He invaded our privacy, misrepresented himself, and used our family as research subjects without consent." "Actually," Maxwell said, reaching into his jacket pocket and removing a small digital recorder, "I'd like to play something for you." He set the device on the table and pressed play. Alexander's voice filled the dining room. "Maxwell, Victoria and I will be away this weekend. William will be with his grandparents. While we're gone, I'd like you to participate in a university research study being conducted at our home. Some professor wants to observe household dynamics or something. They'll pay you $200 for your time. Just sign whatever forms they give you. It's harmless academic nonsense." Maxwell stopped the recording. "That was 18 months ago, Mr. Prescott. You signed the consent forms yourself, as did Mrs. Prescott, though I doubt either of you read them. They explicitly stated that your household was being observed as part of a sociolinguistic study on class, language, and power dynamics. The University Ethics Committee insisted on informed consent. You were informed. You just didn't care enough to pay attention." Victoria's face had gone pale. "Those forms? With all the academic jargon? I thought it was just about interviewing the staff about working conditions." "It was about observing authentic interactions between employers and household staff. My position as your butler was the methodological approach, not the deception you're suggesting." Eleanor Harrison was watching the exchange with increasing interest. "Alexander, this could actually be quite beneficial for Westlake Academy. Having a scholar of Dr. Thompson's caliber associated with our community, even in this unusual way." "Associated?" Alexander sputtered. "He's not associated with our community. He's infiltrated it under false pretenses." "Dad," William interrupted, his voice small but determined. Dr. Thompson helped me with my schoolwork all the time. He knows more than my teachers do about almost everything. He never treated me like I was stupid when I asked questions." The simple observation landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward with implications. Maxwell turned to William with genuine warmth. "That's because you ask excellent questions, William. Curiosity is the foundation of true education." Patrick nodded enthusiastically. His paper on educational approaches for multilingual development completely changed how our school handles ESL programs. Our principal quotes him all the time. James Harrison, a businessman above all, seemed to be calculating something. "Dr. Thompson, would you consider giving a lecture series at Westlake Academy? We could arrange an appropriate honorarium, of course. Our students would benefit tremendously from your insights." "Dad!" Alexander objected. "You can't possibly be taking his side in this." "I'm not taking sides," Harrison replied pragmatically. "I'm recognizing an opportunity. Dr. Thompson has conducted what appears to be groundbreaking research right under our noses. That research will be published regardless of how we react tonight. We can either be portrayed as antagonists or as enlightened participants who embrace the findings and use them to improve our community." Victoria, always attuned to social advantage, began nodding slowly. "There is a certain distinction in having been selected for such an important study.
You've never invited me to join a meal, even on holidays when I worked 14-hour shifts. You've made jokes about my accent and intelligence in front of me, as if I couldn't possibly understand the sophisticated humor of educated Americans. Victoria flushed, glancing uncomfortably at the Harrisons. Patrick, still fascinated by the unfolding drama, interjected, "Your TED Talk has over 2 million views. It's required watching in our global studies curriculum. How did no one recognize you?" "People see what they expect to see," Maxwell explained. "When you're wearing a butler's uniform and speaking with an accent that confirms existing biases, you become invisible as an individual. It's remarkable how powerful those preconceptions can be." James Harrison, who had been unusually quiet, finally spoke. "I remember that TED Talk now. The language of invisibility, wasn't it? About how accents and linguistic patterns influence social perceptions and power dynamics." He turned to Alexander with an unexpected smile. "You've had a renowned sociolinguist working in your home for 2 years, and you never knew it. That's actually rather fascinating." Alexander clearly didn't share his fascination. "I don't care if he's the king of linguistics. He invaded our privacy, misrepresented himself, and used our family as research subjects without consent." "Actually," Maxwell said, reaching into his jacket pocket and removing a small digital recorder, "I'd like to play something for you." He set the device on the table and pressed play. Alexander's voice filled the dining room. "Maxwell, Victoria and I will be away this weekend. William will be with his grandparents. While we're gone, I'd like you to participate in a university research study being conducted at our home. Some professor wants to observe household dynamics or something. They'll pay you $200 for your time. Just sign whatever forms they give you. It's harmless academic nonsense." Maxwell stopped the recording. "That was 18 months ago, Mr. Prescott. You signed the consent forms yourself, as did Mrs. Prescott, though I doubt either of you read them. They explicitly stated that your household was being observed as part of a sociolinguistic study on class, language, and power dynamics. The University Ethics Committee insisted on informed consent. You were informed, you just didn't care enough to pay attention." Victoria's face had gone pale. "Those forms? With all the academic jargon? I thought it was just about interviewing the staff about working conditions." "It was about observing authentic interactions between employers and household staff," Maxwell explained. "My position as your butler was the methodological approach, not the deception you're suggesting." Eleanor Harrison was watching the exchange with increasing interest. "Alexander, this could actually be quite beneficial for Westlake Academy. Having a scholar of Dr. Thompson's caliber associated with our community, even in this unusual way." "Associated?" Alexander sputtered. "He's not associated with our community. He's infiltrated it under false pretenses." "Dad," William interrupted, his voice small but determined. Dr. Thompson, helped me with my schoolwork all the time. He knows more than my teachers do about almost everything. He never treated me like I was stupid when I asked questions." The simple observation landed like a stone in still water, rippling outward with implications. Maxwell turned to William with genuine warmth. "That's because you ask excellent questions, William. Curiosity is the foundation of true education." Patrick nodded enthusiastically. His paper on educational approaches for multilingual development completely changed how our school handles ESL programs. Our principal quotes him all the time. James Harrison, a businessman above all, seemed to be calculating something. "Dr. Thompson, would you consider giving a lecture series at Westlake Academy? We could arrange an appropriate honorarium, of course. Our students would benefit tremendously from your insights." "James!" Alexander objected.
You can't possibly be taking his side in this." "I'm not taking sides," Harrison replied pragmatically. "I'm recognizing an opportunity. Dr. Thompson has conducted what appears to be groundbreaking research right under our noses. That research will be published regardless of how we react tonight. We can either be portrayed as antagonists or as enlightened participants who embraced the findings and used them to improve our community." Victoria, always attuned to social advantage, began nodding slowly. "There is a certain distinction in having been selected for such an important study."
Maxwell could hardly believe what he was hearing. Even now, they were calculating how to turn the situation to their social advantage rather than examining the deeper implications of their behavior. "My research isn't meant to shame or embarrass," Maxwell explained, maintaining his professional tone. "It's designed to illuminate unconscious patterns that perpetuate inequality. The goal is understanding, not judgment." Alexander was not so easily redirected. "You recorded our private conversations. You documented our family life. How is that not an invasion of privacy?" "I documented interactions between employers and household staff in professional settings," Maxwell clarified. "My research focuses on linguistic patterns and power dynamics in those interactions, not on your private family moments." William, who had been listening intently, asked the question the adults seemed to be avoiding. "Why did you do it? Why did you choose our family?" Maxwell considered the boy carefully. Of all the Prescotts, William had shown the most potential for growth, the most willingness to see beyond the narrow confines of his privileged upbringing. "Because change has to start somewhere," Maxwell answered honestly. "And often it starts with people who have the power to influence systems. Your family represents a demographic that shapes institutional policies, educational approaches, and social norms. Understanding how biases are transmitted within such families is crucial to developing more equitable systems." Eleanor Harrison nodded thoughtfully. "The board has been discussing diversity initiatives for years, but we've struggled to move beyond superficial changes. Perhaps your research could inform more substantive approaches." Victoria, ever the social chameleon, was already adapting to the shifting dynamics. "We've always valued education and cultural awareness, haven't we, Alexander? This could be an opportunity to demonstrate our commitment to progressive values." Alexander seemed torn between outrage and recognition that the Harrisons were viewing the situation as intellectually intriguing rather than scandalous. His business instincts warred with his wounded pride. "I suppose," he said grudgingly, "there might be some value in understanding how certain assumptions influence everyday interactions." Maxwell noted the careful wording, not an admission of bias, but a tentative acknowledgement that biases might exist in abstract interactions. It was a small opening, but perhaps enough to build upon. "My manuscript will be completed in 3 months," Maxwell said. "I'd be willing to share the preliminary findings with you before publication, to give you the opportunity to implement changes if you choose to." William, still processing the revelation that his butler held 3 doctoral degrees and had given TED Talks, looked up with newfound respect. "Does this mean you won't be our butler anymore?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the absurdity of the situation. A world-renowned scholar serving dinner to people who thought him barely educated enough to follow simple instructions. "My fellowship concludes in 3 months," Maxwell replied. "After that, I'll be returning to academia full-time. Princeton has offered me a permanent position in their linguistics department." "Princeton?" Victoria echoed, the name of the prestigious university clearly triggering a reevaluation of the man standing before her. "You're going to be a professor at Princeton?" "I already am a professor at Princeton. I've been on sabbatical for this research project." The dinner party had long since abandoned any pretense of normalcy. Dessert sat forgotten as the implications of Maxwell's revelation continued to unfold. "Well," Eleanor Harrison declared with unexpected enthusiasm, "I think this has been the most illuminating dinner party I've attended in years. Dr. Thompson, would you join us in the living room?
I'd love to hear more about your research on educational methodologies for multilingual students. The Academy has been struggling with our ESL program for years. Before Maxwell could respond, Alexander intervened, a hint of his usual authority returning. Perhaps we should conclude the evening here. It's been rather overwhelming. But James Harrison was not ready to let the opportunity slip away. Nonsense, Alexander. We've just discovered we're in the presence of one of the leading minds in sociolinguistics. I, for one, have dozens of questions about Dr. Thompson's work. The power dynamic had shifted so dramatically that even Alexander seemed unsure how to proceed. The man who had been giving Maxwell orders hours earlier now found himself competing with the Harrisons for his butler's attention. Victoria, always quicker to adapt than her husband, gestured toward the living room. "Shall we continue the conversation more comfortably? Maxwell, Dr. Thompson, would you care to join us?" Her tone had transformed from commanding to almost deferential. As the adults moved toward the living room, William lingered behind with Maxwell. "Is it true?" the boy asked quietly. "All those things you know, the languages you speak, was that all real?" Maxwell smiled, switching effortlessly into fluent Mandarin, one of the languages William was studying at school. "All real," he confirmed, then repeated it in French, Spanish, Arabic, and Russian. "Knowledge is the one thing no one can take from you, William. Remember that." The boy's eyes widened. "Why did you help me with my homework and presentations if you were just studying us?" "Because education is never just research for me. It's a calling. And you have a brilliant mind that deserves nurturing, regardless of my research objectives." For the first time that evening, Maxwell saw the full impact of his revelation reflected in William's expression. Not just surprise at discovering his butler's hidden identity, but a dawning recognition that the world contained far more complexity than his parents had led him to believe. That people couldn't be neatly categorized by their accents or occupations, that appearances could be profoundly deceiving. It was precisely this moment of realization, this crack in the foundation of inherited bias, that Maxwell had hoped to document in his research. The moment when privilege confronted its own limitations and new possibilities emerged. As he followed William into the living room, where the Harrisons were already asking questions about his published work, Maxwell reflected on the unexpected turn the evening had taken. His research methodology might have been compromised, but something more valuable had been gained. A genuine opportunity to influence the very power structures he had been studying. The true test would come in the days and weeks ahead, as the Prescotts either embraced this new understanding or retreated into defensive justifications. But for now, at least, the invisible barriers had been named. The accents had been dropped, and in their place, an authentic conversation had begun. The morning after the dinner party revelation, Maxwell arrived at the Prescott mansion at his usual time. He wasn't certain what to expect, perhaps termination, perhaps awkwardness, perhaps a newfound respect. The house seemed unusually quiet as he entered through the service entrance, his key still functioning. In the kitchen, he found Victoria sitting alone at the island counter, nursing a cup of coffee. She looked up when he entered, her expression a complex mixture of embarrassment and curiosity. "Good morning, Mrs. Prescott," Maxwell said, in his natural voice, no longer adopting the accent he'd used for 2 years. Victoria studied him for a moment. "I didn't expect you to come back today. I still have a job to complete. My research doesn't conclude for 3 more months, and I've always honored my professional commitments." She nodded slowly, turning her coffee cup between her hands. "Alexander spent half the night on the phone with our attorneys. They say we have grounds for a lawsuit, invasion of privacy, misrepresentation, emotional distress." Maxwell waited, sensing there was more to this conversation than legal threats. "But James Harrison called this morning. He's offered to partner with Westlake Academy to create a special lecture series featuring your research. Says it could put the academy on the map academically, not just socially. She looked up directly at him. He's quite impressed with you. And you? Maxwell asked. Are you planning to sue me or invite me to lecture? Victoria sighed, suddenly looking tired. I honestly don't know, Dr. Thompson. 24 hours ago, I thought I knew exactly who you were. Now I'm not sure of anything. Maxwell set his bag down and took a seat across from her. May I speak frankly, Mrs. Prescott? She gestured for him to continue. My research isn't about exposing or embarrassing your family. It's about examining the subtle ways biases are reinforced through everyday interactions. The goal is understanding, not judgment. But you must judge us, Victoria countered.
How could you not? For 2 years, we've treated you as... She trailed off, perhaps realizing there was no way to complete the sentence that didn't expose her own prejudice. As the help, Maxwell finished for her. As someone defined entirely by his service role rather than his humanity. Yes, I've observed that pattern. But I've also observed moments of genuine kindness, particularly between you and William. Victoria seems surprised by this acknowledgement. So your research isn't just a hit piece on wealthy families? It's a scholarly examination of language, power, and perception, Maxwell explained. The manuscript documents patterns I've observed across several households, not just yours. The Prescott family will be anonymized in publication. Victoria was quiet for a moment, considering his words. William has been asking questions non-stop since you left last night. He seems to think you're some kind of superhero in disguise. A small smile played at her lips. I had to look up your TED Talk. It was illuminating. In what way? Maxwell asked, genuinely curious. You speak about language as both a barrier and a bridge, about how accents become markers that people use to make instant judgments about intelligence, education, even moral character. She looked down at her coffee. I recognized myself in your examples. It wasn't comfortable. This admission, small as it was, represented the first crack in the facade Victoria had maintained throughout their 2-year relationship. For the first time, she was acknowledging the possibility that her perceptions might be flawed. Discomfort is often where growth begins, Maxwell offered. The question is, what happens after that discomfort is recognized? Victoria nodded thoughtfully. Alexander wants you gone, but I'm not sure that's the right approach. William adores you, and frankly, firing a renowned academic for exposing our bias would hardly make us look progressive. Always the social calculation, Maxwell noted. Even now, she was weighing appearances against principles. I propose a compromise, Maxwell said. I'll complete my remaining 3 months focusing primarily on William's education rather than household duties. In exchange, I'll ensure the Prescott family is portrayed ethically in my research, highlighting your willingness to learn and adapt once the study was revealed. Victoria considered the offer. And the Harrison Lecture Series? That would be a separate arrangement between myself and Westlake Academy, though I imagine it would reflect positively on your family's commitment to educational excellence if you supported it. The familiar gleam of social opportunity returned to Victoria's eyes. I could chair the committee. It would be a wonderful addition to my community service portfolio. Some patterns, Maxwell realized, would take more than one revelation to change. But it was a start. Where is Alexander this morning? He asked, noticing the man's absence. Victoria's expression tightened. He left early for a meeting with the Harrisons, something about the merger agreement. He's not particularly happy about any of this. And William? Still asleep. He's staying up late researching you online. She shook her head with a mixture of amazement and chagrin. My 10-year-old son knew more about your academic accomplishments within an hour than I bothered to learn in 2 years. Before Maxwell could respond, his phone buzzed with an incoming call. The university department chair's name flashed on the screen. Excuse me, I should take this. Victoria nodded,
a new hesitancy in her manner, the uncertainty of how to interact with someone who had suddenly transformed from servant to scholar in her perception. Maxwell stepped into the hallway to take the call. "Good morning, Dr. Abernathy." "Maxwell, news travels fast in academic circles. I understand your research methodology was compromised last night." "Partially," I confirmed. "My identity was recognized by a student who had seen my TED Talk, but the revelation itself provided valuable data on how subjects respond when confronted with their unconscious biases." "Fascinating. The committee is actually quite excited about this development. We'd like to expand the scope of your fellowship to include this new phase. How are you planning to proceed with the Prescott family?" Maxwell glanced back toward kitchen, where Victoria sat still processing the seismic shift in her understanding of the man who had served her family for 2 years. "I believe we're negotiating a new arrangement, one that might actually prove more valuable than the original methodology."
Get opportunity to observe conscious reflection on previously unconscious behaviors could significantly enhance the research findings. Excellent. Keep us updated. Oh, and Princeton called. They're quite impressed with the preliminary data. The department chair mentioned something about a named professorship. After ending the call, Maxwell returned to find Victoria on her phone, scrolling through what appeared to be his academic profile on the Princeton website. 7 languages, she murmured without looking up. 3 doctoral degrees, 42 published papers, visiting fellowships at Oxford and the Sorbonne. She finally met his eyes. "And for 2 years, I had you polishing silverware and serving canapés to my dinner guests." "The work itself was never the issue," Maxwell clarified. "It was the assumptions about my capabilities and worth based solely on that work." Victoria set her phone down. "William will be up soon. He'll have more questions." "I'm happy to answer them honestly," Maxwell replied. "Children often understand nuance better than adults give them credit for." "That's what he said you always told him," Victoria admitted grievously. "That we underestimate his capacity for understanding complex ideas." "William is exceptionally bright," Maxwell said. "He absorbs information like a sponge when it's presented in a context that engages his curiosity rather than his fear of failure." Victoria winced slightly at this observation. "Alexander and I have always emphasized achievement, excellence, being the best." "There's nothing wrong with high expectations," Maxwell assured her. "But those expectations can be communicated through encouragement rather than pressure, through curiosity rather than competition." For the first time that morning, Victoria smiled genuinely. "You know, you're actually giving me parenting advice right now? Yesterday, I wouldn't have believed you qualified to offer an opinion on raising children." "And today?" Maxwell asked. "Today, I'm wondering if I should be taking notes," she admitted. "William's improved dramatically in school since you started working with him. I assumed it was just maturity, but it was your teaching approach, wasn't it?" Maxwell nodded. "I applied evidence-based pedagogical methods developed through my research. William responds particularly well to contextual learning rather than rote memorization." The sound of footsteps on the stairs interrupted their conversation. William appeared in the doorway, still in pajamas, his eyes widening when he spotted Maxwell. "You came back," the boy exclaimed. "I wasn't sure you would." "I said I would help with your science project today. I keep my promises." William rushed forward, then stopped awkwardly, uncertain how to interact with his former butler now that everything had changed. "Should I still call you Maxwell? Or Dr. Thompson? Or Professor?" "Maxwell is fine," he assured the boy. "My name hasn't changed, just your understanding of who I am." William nodded seriously. "I read about your research last night, about code switching and linguistic profiling and power dynamics. It's really interesting." "You read academic papers?" Victoria asked, clearly surprised. "They have summaries for students on the Princeton website and videos where Dr. Thompson explains his research for kids." He turned back to Maxwell. I watched all of them. You talk differently in those videos, more like how you talk to me when we're doing homework. That's my natural speaking voice and vocabulary. The accent I used as your butler was part of my research methodology, observing how people respond to linguistic markers that confirm their expectations. William seemed to be processing this. So you made yourself sound like what my parents expected to see how they'd treat you. That's a remarkably accurate summary, Maxwell said, impressed with the boy's comprehension. Victoria looked uncomfortable but didn't interrupt. And what did you find out? William asked bluntly. How did they treat you? Maxwell glanced at Victoria, who nodded slightly, permission to answer honestly. I found that when I spoke with an accent that confirmed certain stereotypes, people made assumptions about my intelligence, education, and capabilities. They assigned tasks based on those assumptions, rather than asking about my actual skills or knowledge. William frowned a bit. That doesn't seem fair. It isn't, I agreed.
But it's a common pattern that many people aren't aware they're engaging in. That's why the research is important, to bring unconscious biases into conscious awareness. Victoria cleared her throat. Dr. Thompson and I have been discussing a new arrangement for the remaining 3 months of his research. He'll be focusing primarily on your education, William, rather than household duties. William's eyes lit up. Really? Like a private tutor? Something like that, Maxwell confirmed, though I'll still be observing family interactions as part of my research. Cool! Can we start with my science project? It's about sound waves, and I have so many questions after reading about your linguistics work. Victoria stood up. Why don't you get dressed and have breakfast first? Then you and Dr. Thompson can begin. As William raced back upstairs, Victoria turned to Maxwell. He's never been that excited about school before. Children respond to authentic engagement, Maxwell explained. William isn't just excited about science, he's excited about being taken seriously as a thinker. Victoria nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning in her eyes. I should call Alexander, let him know we're not pursuing legal action. That would be appreciated, Maxwell said, though I understand his initial reaction. Having one's worldview challenged can be disorienting. As Victoria left to make the call, Maxwell began preparing breakfast for William, a task he'd performed hundreds of times before, but now with a different energy. The power dynamic had shifted, but his commitment to the boy's development remained constant. When William returned, now dressed and eager to begin their day of learning, Maxwell set a plate of fruit and whole-grain toast before him. I have a question, William said between bites. If you're this famous professor, why did you spend 2 years as our butler? Doesn't that seem like a waste of your talents? Maxwell considered how to frame his answer in terms a 10-year-old could understand. Research sometimes requires stepping outside traditional methods. To truly understand how language and perception influence social interactions, I needed to experience those dynamics firsthand, not just observe them from a distance. William nodded thoughtfully. Like Undercover Boss, but for science. Maxwell smiled. Something like that, though the goal wasn't to catch anyone doing something wrong. It was to document natural behavior patterns that people often aren't aware of. Like how my parents talk to you differently than they talk to their friends. Exactly. Or how guests at dinner parties would address me only to request service, never to engage in conversation. William looked troubled by this. That doesn't seem very nice. It's not about individual kindness or meanness, Maxwell explained. It's about systemic patterns that get reinforced through everyday interactions. Most people don't consciously decide to treat service workers as less intelligent or less worthy of respect. They absorb those patterns from the culture around them. Can people change those patterns once they know about them? Absolutely, Maxwell assured him. Awareness is the first step toward change. That's why education is so powerful. It helps us recognize patterns we might otherwise never question. Victoria returned, looking relieved. Alexander has agreed to a compromise. No legal action, but a formal agreement about confidentiality and publication rights. That seems reasonable, Maxwell said. "I'd be happy to review any proposed agreement." He's also meeting with James Harrison this afternoon about the lecture series. Apparently, the Harrisons are quite enthusiastic about establishing Westlake as a center for sociolinguistic research. Maxwell nodded, recognizing the familiar pattern. Alexander was pivoting from opposition to opportunity, finding a way to position himself advantageously within the new paradigm. "Mom," William interjected, "did you know Dr. Thompson, speaks 7 languages? He could help me with my French homework, too." "I'm beginning to realize there's very little Dr. Thompson couldn't help with," Victoria replied with a self-deprecating smile. "We've been rather underutilizing his skills." The doorbell rang, unexpectedly. Victoria frowned. "We're not expecting anyone this morning."
Maxwell remained seated as Victoria went to answer the door, another small but significant shift in household dynamics. No longer jumping to perform service tasks, he now occupied the space as an educational professional rather than domestic staff. Voices drifted from the foyer, Victoria's surprised tone and a familiar academic cadence that Maxwell immediately recognized. Moments later, Victoria returned with Dr. Eleanor Klein, Chair of Linguistics at Westlake University. "Dr. Thompson," Eleanor greeted him warmly. "I hope you'll forgive the unexpected visit. When James Harrison called this morning about the possibility of a lecture series, I simply couldn't wait to discuss it formally." Maxwell stood to greet his colleague. "Dr. Klein, what a pleasure. I didn't realize you were connected to Westlake University." "I've chaired the department for 3 years," she explained, "though we haven't had the funding for the kind of research program I've envisioned until now. The Harrisons seem quite committed to establishing a center for sociolinguistic studies, with your work as the cornerstone." Victoria, ever attuned to social hierarchies, was observing the interaction between the two academics with new eyes, seeing Maxwell as a peer to the distinguished department chair rather than as household staff. "William," she said quietly, "why don't you go work on your reading assignment while the adults talk?" "But I want to hear about the research center. It sounds really interesting." Dr. Klein smiled at the boy. "You must be William. Dr. Thompson has mentioned your aptitude for languages in our correspondence." William's eyes widened. "He talks about me to other professors?" "Indeed," Dr. Klein confirmed. "Your questions about linguistic patterns across different languages demonstrated remarkable insight for someone your age." Victoria looked surprised. "Maxwell has been sharing William's academic progress with you?" "With your son's permission, yes," Maxwell clarified. "William's approach to language acquisition provides valuable data for my research on educational methodologies for multilingual development." "I'm a research subject too?" William asked, clearly delighted by the idea. "More of a case study in effective pedagogy," Maxwell explained. "Your progress in French has been particularly noteworthy." Dr. Klein turned to Victoria. "Mrs. Prescott, your son shows remarkable potential in linguistics. With proper nurturing, he could develop into a formidable scholar." The pride that bloomed on Victoria's face was genuine, perhaps the first time she'd received academic praise for her son that wasn't tied to grade performance or social standing. "He's always had an ear for languages. Alexander and I noticed it early, but weren't sure how to develop it properly." "Which is precisely why Dr. Thompson's research is so valuable," Dr. Klein emphasized. "Traditional educational approaches often fail to recognize different types of intelligence and learning styles. William appears to be an auditory linguistic learner who processes information through sound patterns and verbal associations." William was beaming at being discussed as a person with unique intellectual gifts, rather than just as a child expected to achieve good grades. The proposed research center would focus on developing personalized educational approaches based on these kinds of insights, Dr. Klein continued. "We'd like Dr. Thompson to head the initiative, with the Prescott family as founding patrons." Victoria's social ambitions and genuine concern for her son's education aligned in a perfect moment of opportunity. "That sounds fascinating. Alexander and I would certainly be interested in learning more." As the conversation continued, Maxwell observed the subtle but significant transformations unfolding in the Prescott household. Victoria, now engaging with him as an intellectual equal. William, flourishing under recognition of his unique cognitive strengths. The household staff, watching from doorways with newfound curiosity about the man they'd worked alongside for 2 years. The revelation of his true identity had created ripples that were already reshaping the social ecosystem of the mansion. Not through confrontation or shame, but through the simple power of being fully seen and recognized as a complete human being rather than a collection of assumptions. Later that afternoon, as Maxwell worked with William on his science project, the boy looked up thoughtfully. "I think I understand your research better now." "Oh," Maxwell encouraged him to continue. "It's not just about how people talk or what accents they have.
It's about how we decide who matters based on those things. Like yesterday, you were just our butler, but today you're this important professor everyone wants to talk to. But you're the same person. We just see you differently now." Maxwell smiled, deeply impressed by the boy's insight. "That's exactly right, William. Perception shapes reality, or at least how we respond to reality. My hope is that by understanding these patterns, we can create more equitable systems where people are valued for their actual capabilities rather than our assumptions about them." William nodded seriously. "I'm glad you don't talk with the accent anymore. I like your real voice better." "So do I," Maxwell admitted. "Being authentic is always more comfortable than performing others' expectations." As they returned to the science of sound waves, Maxwell reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 24 hours. His research methodology might have been disrupted, but something far more valuable had emerged: a living laboratory of changing perceptions and evolving awareness. The real work was just beginning, not just documenting bias, but actively participating in its transformation. One conversation, one recognition, one moment of authentic connection at a time. 3 months passed swiftly at the Prescott mansion, each day bringing subtle but significant transformations. Maxwell continued his research, documenting the evolution of interactions as the family's perception of him shifted from servant to scholar. The data he collected in this final phase proved more valuable than he could have anticipated, a rare longitudinal study of bias awareness and behavioral adaptation in real time. On a crisp autumn morning, Maxwell packed the last of his personal items from the small staff quarters where he'd lived for 2 years. The space felt different now, no longer a symbol of social hierarchy, but simply a temporary accommodation that had served its purpose. Through the window, he could see William waiting in the garden, perched anxiously on a stone bench. Maxwell carried his suitcase to the main house, where Alexander and Victoria were waiting in the living room. The formal setting suggested they'd given thought to this goodbye, a stark contrast to how household staff typically departed, with minimal acknowledgement. "Well," Alexander began, his tone carefully measured, "I suppose this is it." 3 months had softened his initial anger, though a certain wariness remained in his interactions with Maxwell. Unlike Victoria and William, Alexander had struggled more visibly with the paradigm shift, his identity deeply intertwined with hierarchical certainty. "The university is eager to review my completed manuscript, and Princeton is expecting me next week to begin setting up the new department." Victoria, who had undergone perhaps the most remarkable transformation, stepped forward. "We've been discussing your research findings with the Education Committee at Westlake Academy. The changes you've suggested for their language program are already being implemented." Maxwell nodded, genuinely pleased. William mentioned that. "He's quite excited about the new approach to French instruction." "Speaking of William," Victoria continued, "he has something for you. He's been working on it for weeks." As if on cue, William entered carrying a carefully wrapped package. His demeanor had changed dramatically over the past 3 months. More confident, more curious, less concerned with perfection, and more engaged with genuine learning. "I made this for you," the boy said, handing Maxwell the package, "to remember us by." Maxwell unwrapped it carefully, revealing a beautifully bound book. The cover read, "The Language of Invisibility, A Student's Perspective," by William Prescott. "It's my observations," William explained earnestly, "about how I used to see household staff before you revealed who you really were, and how my perspective changed afterward. I interviewed Maria and Frank, too, our housekeeper and gardener, about their experiences being invisible in wealthy homes." Maxwell was genuinely moved. "This is extraordinary, William. May I share it with my colleagues at Princeton?" William nodded eagerly. "That's why I wrote it. Mom helped me contact a professor who studies children's perspectives on social dynamics. She's going to include some of my observations in her next paper." Victoria smiled proudly. William has discovered a passion for social research. His teachers are quite impressed with his new direction. Alexander cleared his throat. Yes, well, speaking of new directions, he handed Maxwell an envelope.
The board of Westlake Academy has approved funding for the Center for Sociolinguistic Studies we discussed. This is the formal invitation to serve as its first visiting scholar next summer. The invitation represented more than an academic opportunity. It was acknowledgement from the man who had most resisted Maxwell's revelation. Not quite an apology, but a step toward reconciliation. "I'd be honored," Maxwell said, accepting the envelope. The preliminary data from William's educational assessments suggests the new methodologies are already showing promising results. Yes, about those assessments, Victoria interjected. Dr. Klein mentioned something about William possibly participating in a longitudinal study on multilingual development. We'd like to discuss that further. The shift was subtle but profound. From parents who would once dismissed Maxwell's accent as evidence of intellectual limitation to advocates eager to have their son included in his research. William would be an excellent candidate, Maxwell confirmed. His progress in French has accelerated remarkably since implementing the contextual learning approach. William beamed at the praise, not from pressure to achieve, but from genuine engagement with the material. "I've been practicing with Dr. Klein's son, too. We do conversation exchanges twice a week." "And how are your other subjects progressing?" Maxwell asked, knowing this had been a point of concern for Alexander in particular. "Straight A's this term," William announced proudly. "But not because I'm afraid of getting B's anymore. It's because the subjects are actually interesting now that I understand how I learn best." Alexander placed a hand on his son's shoulder, a gesture of pride that seemed more authentic than performative. "The headmaster says William might be eligible for the advanced placement program next year, something about exceptional cognitive processing in linguistic domains." Maxwell recognized Alexander's effort to engage with educational terminology that would have seemed foreign to him 3 months ago. William has always had that potential. He just needed the right approach to unlock it. Victoria checked her watch. "We should probably head to the auditorium soon. They'll want time to set up the recording equipment for your lecture." As a final contribution to his research, Maxwell had agreed to deliver a public lecture at Westlake Academy about his findings, anonymizing the Prescott family, of course, but sharing the broader patterns he documented. The event had sold out within hours, drawing academic interest from universities across the country. "Before we go," Maxwell said, "I wanted to give you something as well." He handed Victoria a bound manuscript. "This is a preview copy of my research. You'll find the Prescott family is referred to as Family A throughout. I wanted you to have the opportunity to review it before publication." Victoria accepted the manuscript with visible curiosity. "I must admit, I'm nervous about what we'll find in here." "Don't be," Maxwell assured her. "The most valuable data came after my identity was revealed, the family's willingness to re-examine assumptions, adapt behaviors, and engage authentically once awareness replaced unconscious bias. That's the real contribution to the field." Alexander frowned slightly. "So we're not portrayed as the villains of the piece?" "There are no villains in educational research," explained Maxwell. "Only patterns to be observed and understood. Your family's journey from unconscious bias to conscious reflection is actually the most compelling aspect of the study." The tension in Alexander's shoulders eased slightly. "Well, that's something at least." As they prepared to leave for the lecture, Maxwell took a final look around the mansion that had been his research site for 2 years. The physical space remained unchanged, still a monument to wealth and privilege, but the social dynamics within it had shifted in ways that would have been impossible to predict 3 months ago. Maria, the housekeeper, who had barely spoken to Maxwell during his time as butler, approached hesitantly. "Dr. Thompson," she said in Spanish, "I wanted to thank you. Since you revealed your research, the family has enrolled me in English classes at the community college. Mrs. Prescott even adjusted my schedule to accommodate my class times." Maxwell responded in fluent Spanish. "That's wonderful, Maria. How are the classes going?" "Very well. And now they ask about my family. They remember my children's names."
She smiled. "Small things, but they matter." "They matter enormously," Maxwell agreed.
Frank, the gardener, had a similar story. The Prescotts had taken a sudden interest in his horticultural knowledge, consulting him on landscape design decisions rather than simply issuing directives. Victoria had even recommended his services to friends, helping him establish an independent landscaping business. These changes hadn't happened automatically. Maxwell had observed the family's stumbles and regressions over the past 3 months, moments when old patterns reasserted themselves, when privilege blindness returned. But each time, awareness had eventually prevailed. Progress wasn't linear, but it was persistent. At the Academy Auditorium, Maxwell was surprised to find not just academics and students, but household staff from throughout Westlake Hills, butlers, nannies, housekeepers, gardeners, chauffeurs. Many had taken time off work to attend, curious about research that validated experiences they'd never before heard articulated in academic contexts. William insisted on sitting in the front row, notebook ready, while Victoria and Alexander took seats beside James and Eleanor Harrison, now fellow patrons of the new research center. The social dynamics of the audience itself told a story. Household employers and employees gathered in the same space to hear about patterns that had shaped their interactions for generations. Maxwell began his lecture with a simple truth. Language is never neutral. It carries power, confers status, and shapes perception in ways we often fail to recognize. For 2 years, I adopted an accent that confirmed certain expectations, and those expectations in turn shaped how others perceived my intelligence, education, and humanity. As he continued, Maxwell observed Victoria leaning forward intently, William taking detailed notes, and even Alexander listening with genuine engagement rather than defensive skepticism. The most significant finding, Maxwell explained, wasn't the existence of bias. We've long had evidence for that. It was the capacity for change when bias becomes visible. When Family A, a typical upper-class household, became aware of their unconscious patterns, they didn't retreat into defensiveness or denial. They embraced the uncomfortable awareness and began the hard work of reconditioning responses that had been automatic and invisible. In the audience, Maxwell noticed household staff nodding in recognition, some with tears in their eyes, their lived experiences finally validated in an academic context. Employers shifted uncomfortably at first, then gradually leaned into the discomfort, recognizing patterns in their own behaviors. This isn't about individual blame, Maxwell emphasized. It's about systemic patterns that we all inherit and unconsciously perpetuate. The question isn't whether we have biases. We all do. The question is whether we have the courage to become aware of them and the commitment to change them. After the lecture, a reception brought together audiences that had rarely interacted as equals, academics, wealthy families, and household staff engaging in conversations that crossed previously rigid boundaries. Victoria, now chair of the Academy's Diversity Committee, moved confidently between groups, introducing service workers to board members with newfound awareness of each person's complete humanity. William had become something of a minor celebrity among the academic set, his observations about linguistic privilege from a child's perspective offering fresh insights to researchers who had studied the phenomenon for decades. Even Alexander found himself engaged in earnest conversation with Dr. Klein about funding permanent scholarships for children of household staff, an initiative that served both his philanthropic image and a newly awakened sense of social responsibility. As the evening wound down, Maxwell found himself alone with the Prescott family one final time. "What happens now?" William asked, the question carrying more weight than his 10 years might suggest. "Now," Maxwell replied, "you continue the work we've started. You notice patterns. You question assumptions. You remember that every person has depths that their role or accent or appearance might not reveal." "And your research?" Maxwell asked. "Will there be a follow-up study?" Maxwell nodded. "The Foundation has approved funding for a 5-year longitudinal study across multiple households. We'll be tracking how awareness interventions affect long-term behavioral changes in family dynamics." "And we'll be part of that?"
Alexander asked, his tone suggesting he was still reconciling himself to being a research subject rather than simply an employer. "If you're willing," Maxwell confirmed. "Your family's journey would provide invaluable data on sustainable change processes." Alexander considered this, then nodded. William would never forgive us if we declined, and I suppose there's still plenty for us to learn. This simple acknowledgement that learning remained necessary represented perhaps the most significant transformation in Alexander's perspective, from a man who had built his identity on certainty and authority to one who could admit the limitations of his understanding. As they said their final goodbyes, William hugged Maxwell fiercely. "Promise you'll still help with my French pronunciation? Dr. Klein says I have potential for native-like fluency with the right guidance." "I promise," Maxwell assured him, "and I'll be back next summer for the research center launch." Victoria extended her hand, then changed her mind and embraced him briefly. "Thank you for your patience with us. I know we weren't always quick learners." "On the contrary," Maxwell replied, "your family adapted more rapidly than any of my research models predicted. You've established patterns that will likely influence households throughout your social circle." Alexander's goodbye was more reserved, but no less sincere. "The Academy Board is already discussing expanding the research center to include a scholarship program for students from underrepresented backgrounds. Your work has shifted perspectives." As Maxwell left the Prescott mansion for the final time, he reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 2 years. He had entered as an invisible presence, a butler whose humanity was secondary to his service function. He departed as Dr. Maxwell Thompson, respected scholar, whose research would potentially reshape educational approaches and social dynamics throughout Westlake and beyond. The true transformation, however, wasn't in his status or recognition. It was in the subtle shifts of perception that had rippled outward from the Prescott family. William now seeing household staff as individuals with stories and knowledge worth exploring. Victoria recognizing her own biases and actively working to reconstruct her social interactions. Alexander finding ways to align his business acumen with more equitable social structures. Maxwell's car arrived to take him to the airport. As he settled into the back seat, he noticed the driver watching him curiously in the rearview mirror. "You're him, aren't you? The professor who worked as a butler for 2 years. My cousin works for the Millers across town. Everyone in service is talking about your research." Maxwell smiled. "Yes, that's me. What you did, showing those rich folks how they really treat us, that was brave." "It wasn't about exposing anyone," Maxwell clarified. "It was about making invisible patterns visible so they could be changed." "Well, whatever you call it, things are already different. Mrs. Miller asked about my engineering classes yesterday. First time in 3 years she's shown any interest in my life outside driving her around." As they drove through Westlake Hills toward the highway, Maxwell gazed at the mansions with their manicured lawns and invisible boundaries. The physical landscape remained unchanged, but the social topography had shifted in ways that would continue to evolve long after his departure. His research had confirmed what he had always believed, that authentic change begins not with confrontation, but with recognition. Not with shame, but with awareness. Not with dismissal of privilege, but with conscious redirection of its power toward more equitable social structures. The manuscript resting in his briefcase told this story in academic language, with data points and statistical analyses. But the real story was in the small, daily interactions that would continue to unfold in households throughout Westlake Hills. Employers seeing staff as complete human beings with dreams and knowledge and families of their own. Children growing up questioning assumptions their parents had absorbed without examination. Household workers recognized for their full humanity, rather than just their service functions. Maxwell's phone buzzed with a text from William.
Just finished reading chapter 1 of your manuscript. Does this mean I'm officially a research assistant now? He smiled as he typed his reply. It means you're a young man who has learned to see what others miss. Keep observing, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep connecting authentically with everyone you meet, regardless of their accent, occupation, or appearance. As the car merged onto the highway, leaving Westlake Hills behind, Maxwell felt a profound sense of completion. His research had documented not just how language shapes perception, but how awareness can reshape reality. One conversation, one recognition, one moment of authentic connection at a time.
The butler with 3 PhDs had completed his most important work, not in prestigious academic journals or university lecture halls, but in the transformed perceptions of a family who had learned to see beyond accents and expectations to the full humanity of every person they encountered. And that, Maxwell reflected as the mansions of Westlake Hills faded from view, was a lesson worth 2 years of polishing silverware and serving dinner parties. A lesson that would continue to spread, rippling outward through communities and generations yet to come. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.